Before Dawn chose a side, a woman named Larkin Delano vanished into the silence of a North Dakota grain silo. The town said she fell. The sheriff said she jumped. But years later, when an intern unearthed a box of old tapes, the wind itself seemed to ask, "Are you sure?" What began as an accident twisted into an anatomy of trust, shame, and control, revealing how devotion can turn into confinement and faith into possession. This isn't just a story about death. It's about the quiet violences that thrive where kindness is currency, and how one woman's fall made a whole town tremble awake. The last time anyone saw Larkin Delano alive, Dawn had not made up its mind. The elevator light in the grain silo blinked like a tired eye, and the wind laid its hand on the prairie the way a parent does when they're too worn out to soothe. I remember, though memory is an unreliable witness, the blue of her parka hood against the colorless field, a small bright decision in a place that prefers its colors muted. We found her at the base of the ladder, neck at an angle the body doesn't choose. The sheriff said the fall could have been her doing. A cousin muttered that no one climbs that high without wanting something. Her mother, whose hands were always chapped from the school cafeteria sink, stared past all of us and asked if someone would please turn off the wind. Larkin was 26, a part-time substitute teacher with a laugh that blew dandelion seeds across your chest and lodged there. She collected postcards of bridges, wrote letters she never sent, and was known to write fallen tombstones in the Lutheran cemetery after storms, the private kindnesses that leave no evidence. She had a way of pausing before answers, like she was holding them up to the light to check for cracks. Born in Carrington, raised on the brittle promises of oil rumors and wheat, she wore a Silver Saints medal she called her Weather because its face changed with the day. She dated men who admired the prettiness of her quiet but feared its endurance. The silo ladder bore no prints anyone could read. The lock had been undone then refastened. Our town was full of people who returned what they borrowed. A strand of hair caught in the latch matched her shade, corn silk darkened by rain. She had written in a notebook the week before, "Wake up early, check the sky, don't be afraid today," which sounded both like a prayer and a dare. Her wrists showed old, white scars from a high school winter. She'd said they were from a snowmobile accident. Nobody pushed too hard on that story. We are from North Dakota. We believe in snow's capacity for damage. At the funeral, the pastor spoke in the careful, neutral voice of someone stepping across thin ice. "We cannot know the full circumstances," he said. He did not say suicide. He did not say murder. He let the words sit in the air between us like two chairs, and no one could tell which to choose. Larkin's mother wore the silver medal around her wrist like a shackle. The clasp had broken. Someone hummed a hymn off-key. The wind kept changing direction, so the smoke from the incense could not settle. When the pastor pressed the shovel into the dirt, the handle squeaked. That night, the town slept with its lights on, as if illumination could make consequence behave. Years passed and the silo aged into a landmark of avoidance. We learned to walk new routes home. The grain companies changed hands, the schools consolidated, the diner switched brands of coffee without telling anyone, because grief, even when shared, demands a private language. Those who loved Larkin carried her like a small stone in the lining of their pockets. Sometimes we would forget it was there. Then our fingers would find it, and the forgetting would crack. What I knew then, what I think I knew, is that death arrived softly without spectacle and that the town preferred silence not out of respect but self-defense. If Larkin jumped, it meant a failure of vigilance. If she was pushed, it meant a failure of trust. Nobody wanted to own either. So we held both possibilities at once, like two ends of a rope that might still be the same rope if you were far enough away. The box surfaced in March, when snowmelt turns the ditches into brief rivers and every fence post looks like a confession. It came from the back room of the county office, where old subpoenas and school board minutes rest in the kind of peace only dust grants. An intern named Becca, allergic to the dust and to the pieties of small towns, was looking for a tax parcel map when she found the mislabeled carton. Farm Liens, 1986–1989. She sneezed, slit the tape, and pulled out a stack of cassette tapes wrapped in gray felt like small animals being kept warm. The handwriting on the labels was spare, just dates. One read, OCT 12–1988, Del Silo. Del as in Delano, Becca asked the county clerk, who, with the protective vanity of a person who has cataloged other people's lives for 30 years, said, "We don't speculate here." But later that afternoon she carried the box herself down the hall to the sheriff's station, cradling it loosely, as if changing the grip would alter the story. They had to borrow a cassette player from the school. Technology ages into usefulness when no one is expecting it. The sheriff, not the same man as before, set the machine on his desk like an altar. The play button stuck and needed the smallest push with a pen tip. The tape stuttered into sound, hiss, distant air, the cottony movement of a sleeve. Then a voice I recognized, though it took a minute, Larkin's mother, younger by decades. "I told you," she said. "I told you we heard something like a call." Or maybe it was the wind in the vents. A pause longer than the phrase it held. The investigator on the tape, an out-of-towner brought in for a week that autumn when budgets briefly allowed it, asked, gently, "What did it say?" The mother breathed. "It didn't say, honey. It sounded like a question, as if the sky itself were asking, 'Are you sure?'" There were other tapes. A man who worked nights at the elevator recalled a pickup idling by the road with its lights off. He named no names. In our county, naming names is a kind of violence. A friend from the school remembered a letter Larkin had asked her to mail, a letter to no one with no address, just a borrowed postcard of a bridge in Oregon and a stamp already licked. She said, "It's about weight." I said, "Wheat." She laughed, but not as a joke. At the bottom of the box, under an envelope of pay stubs and a ball of twine, there was a disposable camera, undeveloped. The intern took it to the pharmacy out on Route 281, where the same clerk had been ringing up aspirin and magazines for 22 years. When the clerk slit open the paper sleeve that evening, she found 13 photographs. Most were of the sky at different hours, the bleached ribs of the silo, a hand in the corner of one frame held open like it was expecting rain. The last was of a note pinned to the silo's interior door. "I will be where I cannot fall." The handwriting was neat, rehearsed. Not a promise, not a threat, something else. The sheriff called in a state investigator to review the material. He was told to be discreet, a word that in our county means invisible. He drove up in a car too clean for March and introduced himself without offering a hand. "I'm here because sometimes time loosens tongues," he said. "Not to pry, to listen." People nodded. We do not want to be pried. Listening, we can endure. At the town hall meeting that followed, ostensibly about potholes and spring budgets, the box sat near the dais, a suggestion in cardboard. When the microphone crackled to life, no one spoke of Larkin or the tapes. But afterward, in corners and parking lots, windows rolled halfway down, there were sentences with missing subjects and verbs. That night, he was there. Didn't think she would. The investigation reopened the way old wounds do, with a sting that proves we are still capable of feeling. What the tapes offered was not proof but permission, to revisit the hour when a life narrowed into a single ladder, a single step. It wasn't that the community had forgotten. Forgetting implies relief. We had stored the memory where we could bear it. The rediscovery felt less like a key fitting a lock and more like the lock admitting it wanted to be opened. He arrived without entourage and carried his coat over his arm as if refusing the weather might make it relent. His name was Jonah Ellings, late 30s, a face arranged to reassure without promising. He did not ask for files first. He asked for names and then for stories in that order. "I don't want to know what you know," he told me in the diner that kept its sugar packets in old jelly jars. "I want to know who you are when you talk about what you know." He began where others had ended, with Larkin's pauses. "People use silence differently," he said. "Some wield it like a blade, some hide inside it, some are asking for us to fill it." He asked what Larkin had left unsaid, and the question sat there between us like a third cup of coffee we were both pretending not to drink. I told him about the postcards, the way she'd hold them to the window before writing, as if aligning her thoughts with the horizon lines of faraway cities. He nodded like someone mapping currents. "Bridges," he murmured. "A person who loves bridges is a person who believes separation can be negotiated." Jonah visited the silo only once and then only to stand with his back turned, watching the sky press against it. "Places don't confess," he said. "People do, sometimes by accident." He spent the rest of his hours in the school hallways, the church basement, the VFW bar on a slow Tuesday when everyone spoke softly out of habit. He asked about loyalty. He asked what we owed to the dead and what the dead owed to us. He asked if, on the night of the death, anyone had felt a pressure, his word, behind their ribs, the kind that makes you take an extra breath before you answer a simple question. When he spoke with Larkin's mother, he didn't sit across from her but beside her on the sagging floral sofa, aligned toward the same blank TV. "Sometimes," he said after their greetings had dissolved, "a person lives two stories at once, the one they tell and the one they stand inside, wordless." Her hands twisted a dish towel into a slender rope. "What if both stories are true?" she asked. "Then we ask which truth we can bear," he said. She looked at him and something eased, but not enough to call relief. He kept returning to the note from the photograph, "I will be where I cannot fall." He wrote it on a yellow legal pad, then crossed out words, "be, cannot, fall," testing the sentence for fractures. "If you take away cannot," he said to the deputy who drove him around because the roads had their own opinions, it reads, "I will be where I fall." That's a different kind of promise. The deputy, grateful to be asked something that wasn't a direct question, said, "Maybe she meant water." People say things like that about rivers. Jonah smiled without amusement. Or maybe she was telling someone she'd stop letting them be the ground. He didn't ask who had enemies. He asked who had been asked to forgive and for what. He didn't request alibis. He asked for stories of the week before, who lingered at the grocery store produce bins, who started wearing cologne again, who switched pews in church, who stopped singing the harmony to a hymn because the melody suddenly felt like obligation. He kept a small notebook but rarely wrote in it. "I'm trying to hear where the shame is," he explained to me once. "Shame hums." There were interviews that sounded like weather reports. It was cold. I went home. I watched the news. He let them finish, then waited. The waiting did something. People filled it or couldn't, and their inability spoke. Pauses gathered at the ends of sentences like leaves at a fence line. He noticed whose eyes stalled when Larkin's name was said, as if catching a toe on an unseen route. He noticed who smiled as a way to end a conversation, and who smiled as a way to continue one without words. With Larkin's old friend Mara, sharp as a sprig of winter mint, loyal in the exhausting way of those who define themselves by it, Jonah asked about the letter on the postcard. She exhaled a laugh into her sleeve and said, "Larkin thought weight could be measured in more than pounds." He didn't ask her to explain. He picked up the postcard with the bridge, set it down again. "Did she ever tell you she was afraid?" A long silence. "She told me she was tired," Mara said. "Of what?" Jonah didn't speak. He looked at the window where the reflection of their two faces overlapped. "Of deciding how to be kind," she whispered. "To herself, to someone else." He waited. "To someone who used her kindness like a coat," she said finally. "Put it on when it was cold, threw it off when it warmed." At the VFW, a man with hands like stubborn knots said, "There are people who go up ladders because they believe in height. Others go because they want to prove they're not afraid. Others go because someone told them to. Jonah stirred his club soda. Which kind was she? The man shrugged. The kind who would climb, then ask if you wanted to see the view. The kind who would offer her hand down first. His method was not a hunt. It was a listening for pressure changes. He tracked where guilt pooled, not where fingerprints smudged. He spoke to the young intern Becca about the tapes, about why the out-of-town investigator from '88 had recorded sounds of pauses rather than confessions. Because that man understood this place, he said softly. We don't say the thing, we grow it. And when he left each conversation, he left behind a sentence shaped like a question that would not stop echoing. What did your silence protect? The town, not used to being studied for its weathered heart, bristled and softened in the same breath. A few people called the sheriff to ask whether the case was really necessary anymore, a phrase as domestic as spare blankets. Others dropped off homemade bread at the station, as if to shore up the hunger that asking causes. Jonah kept to his slow, human pace, and doubt deepened in the way of a well dug by hand. No sudden breakthroughs, just the earth giving way to a colder, older layer of itself. He believed that underneath every fall is a sentence someone couldn't finish. He believed his job was to stand in the pause until someone gathered the courage to complete it, or to refuse, which was, in its honesty, also a kind of truth. When Jonah began to look not for suspects but for attachments, the fabric of our small town started to tremble. It was not violence that shook it, but recognition. He asked who Larkin trusted most and who she avoided without explanation. Those questions didn't require answers. They revealed themselves in the way people paused before speaking a name. Every silence became its own confession. Her mother, Elaine Delano, carried a grief so clean it had edges. She baked for the church, tended to the graves, but would never pass by the silo. Jonah noticed how her voice faltered when she mentioned a man named Alan Pierce, a neighbor who'd helped the Delanos after Elaine's husband died. Alan had been a widower himself, the kind of man the town liked for his predictability. He was kind, yes, but in that way kindness can be a kind of custody. People said he looked out for Larkin, fixing her mailbox, driving her home in storms. But someone else once saw his truck parked by her trailer late at night, headlights off. Jonah met him one morning at the feed store. Alan smelled of cedar oil and quiet labor. When asked about Larkin, he said, she wanted to be seen for herself. That's harder than people think. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor. Did you love her? Jonah asked, without accusation. Alan's jaw moved, not to speak, but as if he were grinding down a word too large to swallow. Love, he said finally, isn't the right measure for what we owed each other. The statement hovered like a fog that refused to lift. Then there was Mara, the friend, the one who'd said kindness tired her. Jonah noticed the tremor in her hands when she talked about the week before the death. We argued, she admitted. She wanted to tell something she shouldn't. I told her not everything can be purified by saying it aloud. Her voice turned brittle. She called me a coward. She pressed her palms together. Maybe she was right. Jonah didn't press further, but that night, when the wind dragged the old power lines into song, he wrote in his notebook, "Friend feared truth more than guilt." Even the pastor wasn't immune. He'd known Larkin since she was a child, baptized her, counseled her during one of her restless winters. When Jonah asked about those sessions, the pastor's reply was formal. She was searching for grace, and grace does not always answer. His eyes, though, betrayed a different knowledge, the guilt of someone who'd offered guidance with one hand and turned away with the other. The lines between affection and control, loyalty and cowardice, blurred until they were indistinguishable. Jonah realized every person who loved Larkin had also betrayed her, in small, survivable ways. That realization didn't point to a killer. It only expanded the circle of sorrow. The investigation had stopped being about death. It had become about how people live with the weight of almost saving someone. Spring thawed more than the earth. It loosened the tongues that had stayed frozen for decades. Mara came to Jonah's motel one evening, rain sticking to her hair, eyes swollen from the kind of crying that starts too late to help. She carried an envelope, yellowed, sealed, and resealed. "I found this in her things," she said. "I should have given it sooner." Inside was the unsent letter Larkin had written on the postcard, the one about weight. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. "To whoever keeps me steady, you have to stop. You mistake my quiet for need, but it is survival. I am not yours to balance." Jonah read it twice. The tone was intimate but not romantic, an appeal to someone who had mistaken power for protection. When he asked Mara whom it was for, she said, "I think Alan, or her mother, or both." Then, after a silence that felt like tearing fabric, "Maybe me." Meanwhile, Alan began to withdraw. He missed work at the co-op, avoided the diner. The sheriff found him one morning sitting in his truck by the lake, staring at the thawing ice. "You can't fix something that was never broken," he said before driving away. Jonah later found out Alan had paid off Larkin's student loans without her knowing. "A gift she didn't ask for," Jonah murmured. "Debt disguised as care." Elaine, the mother, confessed something too, though not to Jonah directly. She told the pastor that she'd found a note on the kitchen table the night before Larkin died, a note she burned in fear. "She wrote she was leaving," Elaine whispered. "Not for death, for distance. Someone had promised to follow if she did." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't bear the shame of that." That was the missing thread, not a secret affair or crime of passion, but the quiet coercion of love misunderstood. Jonah saw the pattern. Everyone had held Larkin down with their version of care, their insistence that she stay, be grateful, be manageable. The latter, the fall, they were symbols now, metaphors for an escape too steep to survive. But then came the last photograph from the disposable camera, overlooked until Becca developed it again. The image, faint but visible, showed two figures near the base of the silo, Larkin and someone taller, face turned away. The outline matched Alan's coat. That truth didn't accuse him, it complicated him. If he was there, he might have been the last person to see her alive, helping, pleading, or stopping her. The photograph could prove anything, which meant it proved nothing. Jonah's final interviews felt less like interrogations and more like eulogies for decency. He had begun to suspect that guilt here was shared, communal, evenly distributed like winter salt. But one conversation undid that balance. It was with the pastor. Jonah asked almost casually about the counseling sessions again. The pastor sighed. "She came to me frightened, yes, but not of death, of exposure." He paused. "She said someone was using her goodness against her, someone she couldn't accuse without ruining herself." Jonah waited. "Did she name them?" The pastor looked away. "She didn't have to." That night Jonah returned to the tapes. On one of them, half erased by time, he heard a voice, a man's, soft, tremulous. "You're too pure for them, Larkin. They'll use you. Let me take care of you." The voice was unmistakable. The pastor. The revelation was neither shocking nor simple. It was inevitable, the way water finds the lowest ground. The pastor had built his reputation on compassion. He had guided her under the guise of grace, until she couldn't distinguish salvation from possession. When she resisted, he warned her about sin, about ruin. His sermons that autumn had been about fallen angels and feminine temptation, words that now glowed with retrospective venom. Jonah confronted him, but quietly, in the church office. "She tried to leave you," Jonah said. "You told her leaving was falling." The pastor's hands trembled. "I only wanted her to see her worth," he whispered. Jonah nodded slowly. "And when she saw it, you couldn't stand it." The pastor didn't deny it. "If you tell them," he said, "they'll lose what little faith they have left." Jonah's silence was answer enough. The law could take its course, But the story had already decided how it would end in shame, not resolution. The tapes, the photographs, the letter, none of them could resurrect innocence. They could only expose how easily care becomes control when spoken in the wrong voice. When the arrest came, the town reacted with disbelief that felt rehearsed. People said things like, "He baptized my children, he buried my father, he couldn't have." But Jonah knew better. Evil rarely needs to be monstrous, it just needs to be trusted. Months later, the prairie returned to its quiet rhythm. The headlines faded, the trial loomed, but the air carried a different silence, not the hush of secrecy, but the fatigue of truth. Jonah stayed until the first frost, walking the fields at dusk, watching the sky bruise into its long winter color. He no longer believed in closure. He believed in endurance. Before leaving, he met Elaine one last time. She poured him coffee without speaking. After a long pause, she said, "I heard they found another tape." Jonah looked at her. "Did they?" She smiled faintly. "If they did, I hope they burn it." He understood. Some truths, once spoken, strip the living more than they honor the dead. He left her with that mercy. In his report, he wrote, "Evidence inconclusive. Death undetermined." It was a lie meant to spare a small town from shattering further, to give the illusion that mystery could still protect what innocence remained. The silo still stands. The wind still sounds like someone calling a name. And sometimes, in the dim hour before morning, those who remember Larkin Delane swear they see a figure near its base, looking upward, as if rehearsing the decision between rising and falling. Justice, Jonah thought, is not the opposite of love. Sometimes it is love's most painful disguise.